don't have 2295. I wasn't given.
Hello, welcome to today's presentation. My name is Emily Morey, and I am a historical researcher in the Local History and Genealogy Division of the Central Library of Rochester and Monroe County. And I want to welcome those of you in the audience, as well as those of you live streaming at home, to today's program, Writing the Story of Queen Catharine Montour and Awaking the Montour Legacy. Just a couple housekeeping notes. There are restrooms just to the left of here as well. There is a table with books and craft and jewelry items being sold, so please don't be shy. So today marks the first day of Native American Heritage Month, and we are proud to honor this occasion with today's program focused on Haudenosaunee heroine Queen Catharine Montour and her legacy. Today's program is going to be a little different than originally planned. We had originally hoped to have a dialogue between author Cynthia Neal and one of Catharine Montour's descendants, Jamie Montour. Unfortunately, Cynthia Neal was not able to make it today, but we are very pleased to have Jamie Montour here with us today to share her story and explore how the Montour name is a living legacy of advocacy, resilience, and spiritual sovereignty. And just a few words about Ms. Montour. She is a paralegal, a life and wellness coach, and a knowledge keeper from 6 Nations of the Grand River, First Nation number 40 in Ontario, Canada. And she is one of the last remaining descendants of Catharine Montour. So without further ado, please help me give a warm welcome to Jamie Montour.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us here today. A special thanks to Emily Morey for the months of brainstorming for this event. Unfortunately, I cannot present as anticipated. Cynthia and I had been working very hard this past week trying to put our stories together so that they were able to flow in terms of how she came to write the novel and then how I came to find the novel and how everything kind of tied together so that we could show the importance of what historical fiction is potentially used for. Queen Catharine was an actual figure in history. Cynthia had done a lot of research to find the information that I couldn't find, so it was very necessary that we met in this fashion. So unfortunately, with her absence, I do pray and send so much healing to her right now. She is probably suffering that she wishes she was here, and I'm going to do the best I can in her absence. I do have books here that she had sent with me so that she could still sell them, present them in a way. So I want to start with acknowledging the ancestors, the first people of this land, the Haudenosaunee, and in particular the Seneca, the keepers of the Western Door. And also the many Europeans who made their homes here. May there be truth, understanding, cleansing, and healing in this land. So we've gathered upon lands that have carried footprints, stories, and ceremonies of the Haudenosaunee since time immemorial. As a descendant of the Haudenosaunee and Lenape, Delaware, I acknowledge all ancestors of my DNA. As a descendant of the Montour family, I return here in gratitude to the ancestors who once walked, spoke, and dreamed upon these lands to honor their spirit and the legacy that still lives through us today. In our way, before we speak or do any work, we begin with the words before all else. In Gayakono Kiuga language, that translates to the Ganohonyo. Unfortunately, I do not have the language to say this Ganohonyo, and it's quite long. However, I would like to honor that and to bring our minds together as one in gratitude. We give thanks for every one of us who have come together to join in one mind as we discuss what will be shared. We give thanks to Mother Earth, to the water, the plants, the trees, the four-legged animals, to the birds, to the thunders, the four winds, the sun, Grandmother Moon, the stars, and to Creator, all that sustains life. May our words today honor this land, its first peoples, and all of our relations. Thank you. Yeah. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is the foundation of authenticity for our people. The peacemaker Daganawida brought peace to the once warring nations of the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. He showed that even those who were not the most honorable carried the potential to be transformed through ceremony and rise into roles of great responsibility. With the birth of the Confederacy, the white pine, our tree of peace, was planted at Onondaga. Weapons of war were buried beneath its roots, and the eagle was placed at the top of the messenger as a messenger of the Creator and guardian of peace. The 4 white roots extend in all directions, offering safety and belonging to all those who choose to live by the principles of Gaiweo, the good mind. The symbolism of the Tree of Peace and its eagle have long played an active role in my life. Since childhood, I would draw the Tree of Peace with its eagle soaring above. I would doodle this when I was supposed to be focusing in class, even when I was in college. When asked to draw any piece of artwork, it's always been my go-to, and in early 2025, it became a part of my rebrand. So it's now included in my logo for JLM Paralegal Life and Wellness. In the creation story, it is said that the eagle is a messenger for the Creator. By placing the eagle atop the Tree of Peace, it symbolizes authenticity, grounding, strength, vision, and unity, principles that continue to guide us and are carried into our healing journeys. In my story, the symbolism of peace with an adversary from my past was received when in April, I dreamed this person tattooed the Tree of Peace on my left arm. The significance with that was this person and I did not get along for years. And when I received that tattoo, it was a gift to know that there would now be peace between us, which was reflected on when I woke from that dream. Unfortunately, there was a presentation that was going to go along with Cynthia and my presentation, and I didn't receive the copy of it. It didn't come to my email, so I'm making do. I do have some information that she wanted shared. I do not have the song that she wanted shared, unfortunately. However, I will now have to skip over her portion of the presentation. She does go into a lot of how she was introduced to Catharine. She grew up in the Montour Falls area and always had a connection to the land. It's not my story to tell. It really does come best through her. However, when she and I first met, it was through her book, and it was in those first 3 chapters that I knew I had to meet this lady. My story started from a little town on 6 Nations. It's not so much a town, but a corner that's been named Smoothtown. So I was born and raised on 6 Nations, and here I am in Rochester telling you about it. It's fascinating. It's 100% spirit-led, and I'm truly honored to be able to do this, and really surprised that my parents actually were able to attend. So I was very surprised. My parents are in the audience. Grandmother Renee, also another valued family member of mine, is also present today. So I'm truly blessed. Now, if I can get through this without crying, that would be the best for me. So what I'll do is I will present my portion that I had prepared, just to give you a better understanding of who I am, and then I will share with you what I found. So as a descendant of Catharine Montour, I stand before you carrying the voice of my grandmothers, returning to the lands that once carried their footprints and prayers. I was born and raised on the Six Nations of the Grand River Indian Reserve in a smaller section of the reserve known as Smoothtown. Six Nations is the largest Indian reserve in Canada and is located in Ontario, only 4 hours from Montour Falls, so I believe it's 2.5 from here. Yeah. I am a registered band member of Six Nations, however, I'm a registered Delaware. So with that registration, which is just a line on a piece of paper, that became the beginning of my struggle with belonging. When I was 5 years old, I remember a classroom exercise where we were asked to go home and find out our nation and clan. I proudly returned and said, I'm a Delaware turtle. And that was the moment I first heard the words that you don't belong here. So that was called out by several other students. And at only 5, that's when I learned what shame was, or what it felt like. Growing up, I didn't have access to my language, to ceremonies, or to traditional teachings of the Lenape Delaware people. However, I was a soft shoe dancer through grades 1 to 6, which connected me to the Gayakono Cayuga social music, social songs, and social dances, as well as I learned Cayuga language going through school. So that was from grade 1 to all through high school. I learned the Cayuga language. So I had later learned that the Cayuga language and its teachings were foundational for the Delaware people. It was the Cayuga that brought the Delaware to the Six Nations under their protection. My grandmothers were Christian women. They had faith in Creator, but the culture wasn't there. So I later learned to live between the two worlds. I was raised with Christian beliefs, but it really strengthened my spirit when I sought the traditional teachings of the Haudenosaunee ancestors. I believe that my collaborative approach with the two belief systems, I believe that having both of these really does gift me with an ancient wisdom. And it's inclusive. So there's no judgment on any one spiritual belief, that all beliefs have purpose. It's my maternal grandmother actually had it in her mission in life was to bring together the traditional teachings of the Haudenosaunee with her Christian beliefs. And there's actually a blanket that's been quilted in honor of that, which we still have posted in our office. So I feel like I still carry that legacy. I do walk with my ancestors, and I feel them. I feel supported in what I do, and I trust that every person that shows up in my life really does have a purpose in illuminating a part of me that I may have not remembered. I had a stronger connection with my maternal line than my father's family. That was the Montour family. Now in Haudenosaunee, we follow the mother traditionally. But as a registered Delaware, I was almost felt to be forced to follow my father's. So I spent a lot of time getting to know what that meant, because I spent even more time trying to disconnect from it. Being a Montour had made my childhood harder. So my physical appearance was mostly given through my Montour genetics. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but you know, when I was younger, it was daunting. It was a lot of the reason I got teased. I was tall, I was dark, I had curly hair, I wore really thick glasses, which I think I got from my mom's side. Yeah, the most significant part was that Montour trait. See, I had an underbite that was in my father's line. So my brother has the same trait, but I was 16. I was 16 when I chose to go through reconstructive surgery so that I could fit in. So people would stop asking me, "What's wrong with your face?" or calling me bulldog, or telling me I was ugly, you know. So I mean, growing up as a Montour, I didn't get along with very many people. I had friends, but I never really connected with anybody. I've always felt very disconnected from other people and my family. So I've really kind of had to go within to heal what's happening, because I was to the point of nothing made sense. I struggled with mental health and addictions for several years, and I never let anybody know that side. So it was a mask that I wore. I could go to work full time. I worked as a legal assistant for 13 years. I could go to school full time. I was doing that at the same time to get my paralegal license. And I was going through one of the hardest times of my life. I'd spent much of my life trying to disconnect from the Montour family. This was around the time that I had tried moving away from Smoothtown, and I tried changing my name through marriage, and neither of which stuck. So as you will know, I still live at Smoothtown, and I'm still a Montour. It's meant to be. And I couldn't understand why. 2017, I became a widow after the passing of my estranged husband, the father of my 3 children. I went into my addiction pretty heavily. I did vow to myself that I'd give myself a year, and that after that year I would get my life on track. That last year was one of the hardest, and I finished school. I got my paralegal license, and then I got sober. So by 2018, I chose sobriety, and this addiction I had to cocaine. I'd had that for 25 years, and I never let anybody know. So once I didn't have that as a coping mechanism anymore, I really had to figure out why I went that route. I really had to start feeling. I had to learn to love myself. I had to explore the shadows of my trauma, emotional attachments that kept me bound to pain, that kept those reoccurring thoughts of relapse. But I was determined to stay sober. I have been 7 years sober as of September 16, 2018. I would not change a single part of my life. I have come to terms that all of what I experienced was necessary for me to be who I am in this moment, able to talk about my trauma, able to emotionally understand and to recognize the triggers before they turn to those negative thoughts that can then lead to relapse or depression. Yeah, I sought peace through every healing path that I could find. Connecting to Spirit through my grandmother's Christian teachings, then later learning from elders, knowledge keepers, and participating in Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe ceremonies. They were opening doorways for me. And I didn't understand at that time what it was about to show me. And that led up to 2025. December 30th, 2024, I wanted to go into the new year with new eyes. I wore glasses since I was 2 years old, so I had laser eye surgery. And I was determined that 2025 I was going to see the world clearly without any, because I always had dirty glasses. So it wasn't going to be that way. I was going to be free and clear to be able to see what I need to see. And what I saw has been nothing but miraculous. After years of struggling through trauma and addiction, there is a point of reflection which is called the medicine walk. It's that moment when Creator whispers, "You've carried enough. Now it's time to remember who you are." This led me to an ancestral reconciliation journey that I took in April. So I planned this journey. I formally planned this journey. I knew that being a Delaware, we had come from the Pennsylvania area. I believe it was November 2022 when my mother and I, we came up from Fort Lauderdale and we traveled that path through Delaware and up through Rochester and returning home. But for me, it was really knowing who I was following. So I started a genealogy research on Six Nations. I believe it was actually this year as well, January this year, when I show up at the genealogy meeting. It was the first of the year, but I couldn't find anything on the Montour. I saw my Uncle Joe's name, but because he was married to my Auntie Nette, who was a Mohawk woman on Six Nations, that was really the only connection I found. So I went with Google. I went with Google and Googled my ancestors' names. So Frank Weaver Montour was my great-grandfather, and there's a lot of information on him. He was a veteran of World War I and II, so there was something to go by. They spoke of his father, Joseph Montour. He was referred to as Delaware Joe. Delaware Joe, I heard, was a traveling pastor, but I also heard he was the last standing Delaware chief of the Grand River. So there was only bits and pieces of clues. My father is the youngest of his family, and his sister, I believe, is 10 years older, 8 years older. So they're sharing with me what they've heard throughout the years. I've saw pictures of the ancestors that I could follow along and bring with me. But it was when I understood Joseph Montour, so Delaware Joe, was my great-great-grandfather. He was the Delaware chief, and he had been interviewed by Frank Speck. Frank Speck authored The Celestial Bear Comes to Earth, and within that book, I guess, within that book it states he had direct communication with Delaware Joe, and in there Delaware Joe had informed him that we were descendant from Andrew Montour and T.D. Uscum. So Chief T.D. Uscum was prominent in history as well, as was Andrew. But I had no idea that I was going to find out what I found out by that connection alone. So in April, when I was going down towards Philadelphia, I went to Wilkes-Barre because the Chapel of the Delaware, I went to a genealogy meeting that they had there, and a lot of the participants were saying, go to Wilkes-Barre, start there. And that is where Queen Esther's Rock is. So if you're familiar with history, she was said to have been involved with the Wyoming massacre. But there's nothing really that says that to be true. It's just there's writing that says that happened, that she was there, and then conflicting that she wasn't. So I went to Wilkes-Barre. I traveled with an elder, and it was to do land-based healing. I was reconnecting to my ancestral lands, placing my feet on the ground where they once had their footsteps, and holding ceremony on a daily basis just to acknowledge them, to welcome them home, to let them know that I'm here. And yet they already knew that I was. It was a trip that I followed to look for the Delaware ancestors. And what wound up happening was it was more, they were guiding me to see the Montour legacy. I was at Easton, Pennsylvania. It was my third day, and the elder and I we were in the city center. So she was holding ceremony and was guided to the forks in the river. So where Delaware and Bushkill Creek meet one another, we found our way to the water, and there was a ceremony held. And afterwards, the elder brought forth this stone. And I wish I had a copy of that stone, because the stone really did show me that they were watching and they knew. So the stone was pretty big, and it had a fossilized print of a duck. So it was very awe-inspiring that this was what they wanted to give me, because my nephew was drafted to the NHL through the Anaheim Ducks. So my nephew is Brandon Montour, number 62. He plays for Seattle Kraken. Yeah. It almost made sense that they wanted the Montour name to be known, because he was becoming very famous in what he does. At that time, he had not. No, he had. Did he win the Stanley Cup at that point? No, that was this year. Last year. Yeah, so he wins the Stanley Cup. He brings the Stanley Cup to Six Nations. And here the ancestors give me this stone that has the emblem of the Ducks. I mean, he won the Stanley Cup through the Panthers, but to me, that was the connection. It was more about Montour than it was about Delaware. And that's not to say that I still don't honor the Delaware nation. I am just here to honor the Montour name. So that journey went down to Philadelphia, and then from that moment coming back up towards home, I hit Montour County, Montoursville, and then Montour Falls. So it was at Montour Falls where I really felt the connection. Now that I do have a picture of. And I know it's probably not going to be very big. But that is Montour Falls, and I'm not sure if you can see it from in here. That was the very first time I set foot at Cheekwaga Falls, which is in the heart of Montour Falls. I drove by Montour House to get to these falls, and the moment that I got out and started walking towards these falls, I saw in the middle of the falls a woman. I text my dad right away. I found him. And I was choking back tears when I was telling him that. Because I knew, my spirit knew, and recognized the spirit of my ancestors. There's a part in Catharine in the book. And my book is quite tethered because I went by it quite faithfully. But there's a part where she says, I dreamed people rose from the water, sat on rocks around the waterfall. I walked among them and spoke, but they didn't see or hear me. So as I'm walking up to these and I see her standing in the middle of the falls, the closer I got, the more spirit showed up, the more people it looked as though were around. And I know it's probably hard to see in this picture, but it's one of the most spiritually significant things that I've had in my life. Aside from the duck rock, right? The falls were truly miraculous. This became my place of power. This became my place that I would go in my mind's eye when I was either trying to find peace, safety, tranquility, when I just wanted to get away, when I wanted to return. Before I went to these falls, I managed to make it to the Schuyler County Historical Society. It was open. It was end of the day, so we were just driving through. It was not a long visit in Montour Falls at all, but I managed to get into the Historical Society and speak with the curator quickly. She was helping somebody do their genealogy, so I asked her if she had anything on the Montour family. So she said, absolutely. She sits me down, she brings me this binder, and she brings me this big folder, and she's like, there you go, that's Queen Catharine's family. So I'm looking through it, and don't I find Delaware Chief of the Grand River, Joe Montour, directly descendant from Catharine. And it was amazing. It was a connection that I could never have received anywhere else. I went looking for the book. She had one book left, and I bought it. I saw the falls. I saw all of that within the falls. And I got home, and I started reading. So I was 3 chapters in when I finally knew I had to meet the lady that wrote this book. The lady that wrote this book had done so much research on the Montour family that even though this is historical fiction, it reads in a way that to me felt as though it was intentional for me to understand myself, if that makes sense. Queen Catharine and I share so many commonalities in life. She had 2 sons, 1 daughter. I just happen to have the same. You know, I have my very own Telehimit, who was her children's father, who passed away. I have that. There's so many commonalities. I would like to say are coincidences. But the most important ones that I was reading was that she had a very strong connection to her grandmother. And her grandmother saw who she was going to be before she could. So as she's going through life and learning to become a woman and what that means and how relationships work, she received her teachings through her grandmother. Her grandmother, Madame Montour. They were fascinating people, to say the least. Cynthia told me that in her journey to write the novel, she was guided to learn about Madame Montour, because if she was really going to understand Catharine, she had to understand her grandmother. So there is a book, Madame Montour, something about the fur trade. And I do have the book, but I haven't read it. I'm so fascinated by this book alone that it's what led me to this moment. It led me to be able to stand here and own the fact that I am Montour descendant. I'm not the last known. I'm the first to come forward. I'm the third to come forward, but the first from my family. So, another interesting and fun fact, that when I came across Catharine's reflections, I read certain limiting beliefs that I still carried in my family line, that I carried within myself, I can say. But there is this one part in Catharine where she reflects in silent thought as she sat upon the banks of the Susquehanna. She was watching the colorful leaves fall away from their source. And this is a quote from the book. I wanted to surrender to the seasons of life and be carried from one form to another. I wanted to be like the leaves and let myself dance into more life. So in 2020, I received a Mohawk name, and that is Yodenilat Dedenyo. This translates to the leaves are scattered by the wind. So when I read the words and reflect on the name that I was given, it felt as though she knew that I would be here. Or she prophesied me. She breathed so somebody like me could be here. This entire novel gave me so much insight into who I am. And I knew this from the start. Only 3 chapters in, and I knew I needed to connect with Cynthia. It's like this connection is guided entirely by spirit. It's what brought us here today, standing upon the very lands of where we share our story. I was also gifted with an opportunity in August to travel 13 days with an amazing group of women. There were 7 of us, and we traveled the path of the peacemaker. Our first 3 days were in Tyendinaga, which was the birthplace of Duganawida. We heard the great law recital, and from there we traveled up to Akwesasne, hitting all significant sites along the homeland, the territories, with the intent to do land-based healing, ceremony. But really it was a journey of unity. 7 of us from 6 nations, and I was the only Lenape. I was the only Delaware amongst the seven, right? When we included Montour Falls, it was very hard for me. As much as that journey was a journey of peace, I can honestly say that I was struggling a lot with anger. And I had the supports around me to help me process that. And then at Montour Falls, there was a ceremony held, and at that ceremony, they welcomed the Delaware, and I feel like that's where a lot of it shifted. It was finally feeling accepted. Even though the 7 women that I went with, they were truly accepting, but in a more spiritual sense, my spirit needed that. The spirit of my Delaware ancestors needed that, and I felt it. That journey had so many coincidences. And I say it so liberally because there are no coincidences. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a purpose. So when certain things happen and you understand that it's outside of the norm of reality, your eyes begin to open and you see things from a whole different perspective. You start feeling the ancestors, you can feel the presence of spirit, you can feel total connection with yourself. You feel connected to the earth. You see the world through the eyes so clear that you just know everything will work its way out. We as humans want to control things because we are conditioned with our traumas, with our limiting beliefs, with our conditioning and generational teachings, but they are fundamental for who we are as humans. They just can sometimes limit our true potential, and it's up to us as human beings to transmute those energies. I would never have really spoken like this in my past. I had so many masks on that I didn't even know who I was, let alone how I could be of service to humanity. But today I understand a lot more from then, but a little more than I did yesterday, right? When I first made it through Montour Falls, I got to see Chequaga Falls, but I was always told there's these other falls you have to get to. Eagle Cliff Falls, they were Catharine's favorite falls. They're absolutely gorgeous. I didn't get there that first time. I literally drove through there. I was maybe in the area for 2.5 hours. And then the second time we came through, we were there for, I would say, well, we weren't there very long. We were there for the night, but before we went to sleep that night, I had to make sure that I took these ladies to Eagle Cliff Falls. And in doing that, that was what inspired Cynthia, because I tend to post my experiences when I'm doing these connections to the land. It's always based on my own reflection. I do not share on ceremony and who's in it or what's done or anything like that. It's always my experience. And I have my own ceremony. So as I was dealing with my own anger, I walked away from my group and I found this path, and the path went up the mountain, or up this gorge. And if you could see the picture, I know it's very small, but how should I do this? Oh. Sorry. This was a presentation that I had prepared for another speaking event. Oh, here's the 7 ladies. And from what I found out is my cousin, Walter. So yeah, that's who all got to go. All right. So how does this work here? Is it playing? Oh, here we go. This is Eagle Cliff Falls. Wish I could put it bigger, but so it was because I posted that video on my social media. Cynthia, who lives in New Hampshire, came across that video, and from what she tells me, that was her inspiration to keep on this journey, to do these book tours, to really collaborate and include me in her story. Cynthia's acceptance, that acknowledgement of my connection, is through all of these moments of acceptance that I realized that the Montour lineage, it's not my burden, it's my calling. It's a calling that I heeded and continue to listen to as I honor my ancestors, my grandmothers, Catharine Montour, Queen of the Tumbling Waters, and Madame Montour before her. These were all women of strength, diplomacy, and vision. They stood between worlds and held peace in their hands, and today I'm here to remember and honor them as my life experiences contain the clues tying their wisdom to my purpose. I see the reflection of Jagonsase, First Clan Mother and Mother of Nations, in every woman who dares to speak truth, nurture peace, and hold wisdom in her heart. I feel Catharine Montour in every woman who bridges nations and heals generations. I hear Madame Montour as she advocates through spirit, her wisdom echoing through time. And I'm here as the continuation of their story, a living voice of the Montour legacy. Through my journeys, I've come to understand that ancestral healing is the awakening of the feminine spirit, the remembrance that women were always meant to lead, to guide, and to hold the fire of community. So today, as we speak of Catharine Montour, let us remember the Haudenosaunee women who already lived in a world where equality, leadership, and peace were the foundation. Yeah, thank you.
thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing that incredible and moving journey with us today. Really, really wonderful. It moved me to tears. At this point, if there's any questions for Jamie, and then Jamie, if you could repeat them in the microphone so that the live streaming audience could hear.
How is my brother connected to it? Oh, my nephew? Oh, my brother. So the question was, how is my brother feeling in terms of what I've found, my findings? Well, again, I can't speak for my brother. I can honestly say that my family is proud. Now you're going to choke me up. My brother, he didn't reconstruct his jaw. My brother is very comfortable with who he is. Yeah, he is 10 years older than I am. So he's at a point in his life where it's unfolding miraculously for him. He's 57, married, traveling the world. He plays sports, he loves his job. That didn't bother him. I mean, he had his bullies, he had his moments, but it didn't affect him in that way where he needed to change how he looked. That was more just my need because I always wanted to fit in. But yeah, he's doing pretty fantastic, I would have to say. Any other questions? Yes? Okay, so now the question was, how are the Delaware, were they adopted in under the Cayuga? Yeah, okay. So that part of traditional knowledge, I do not have a true answer. I could tell you what I was told, and that is we were brought in under their wing. It's not the same as the Tuscarora. The Tuscarora were actually acknowledged and brought in, which is why it's now the Six Nations. The Delaware were really just allowed to be with them under the protection of the Cayuga. So that's how I understand that. Yeah, that's a really good question. Would I refer to them as refugees? I don't feel that I would, because there was more than just the Delaware that were on Six Nations that stayed. So the reason I opened this back up is because I do have, and this is courtesy of my other brother. I have two brothers, right? One's 10 years and the other one's 8 years older than me. So my middle brother, the 8 year older than me, was gifted this little tidbit of information, and it's not showing up, unfortunately. Hold on, I can do that. Let's close these. So what this is the Grand River census of Six Nations on the Grand River, 1785. So the Haldeman deed is 1784. This is a handwritten piece of paper that had, and I believe somebody just kind of wrote over it to make it more legible, but you'll see number 9 has Delaware, Aaron's party. There were 48 persons. Number 10, oh, sorry, so that's 1. Then 17, there were other Delaware. There was 183 people. But again, I want to point out that there are 15 Montours. So they weren't even classified under Delaware Nation. Now, with these two parties, these two separate entities, there are Delaware that moved on to Oklahoma. Some stayed on Six Nation, and then some of them went on through to, I think it's Muncie, Moravian Town. But then there was the ones that didn't travel over into Dunville, which is where the Delaware's homeland initially was. They went around the lake and came through Detroit. So that's how some of them are there. And they kind of just went around and met, really. But the ones that came sat at Dunville, so if you notice, if you know Ontario, from the mouth of the Grand River is Dunville. And then there's Cayuga, and then there's Caledonia, and then there's Six Nations. So when they were building the Welland Canal, they flooded out the Delaware area. So Dunville was flooded out. The Delaware then had to migrate over to where the Cayuga were. And that's where I assume they kind of went together to the Six Nations. So refugees, I would say no, but not acknowledged for sure. Any other questions? Yes? Okay. Well, that's going to be hard to repeat for the people online. So the question, okay, so let's, part 1 of the question. Okay. Okay. That is still quite the question. So first part is, with the fact that my brother had the same underbite as I did, and yet he was okay with it, he did nothing about it, and yet I felt I had to get this reconstructive surgery. Do I feel that was because I was pressured to be so... Okay, so if I felt like I felt pressured for the way society feels a woman should look. Okay. All right. Okay. So do I feel any kind of pressure to worry about how I look as a woman, come from my culture or from societal culture or universal norms of what a woman should look like? Okay. Okay. Well, that's a really good question. You know, like I said, I cannot really say what my brother experienced. However, I do know that my brother experienced a lot of medical ailments as a child, so I feel that his underbite was the least of his concerns. As for myself, I don't feel that it was culture-based or woman-based. It just was my lesson. I felt it. No other person could make me feel a certain way if I didn't feel it. I did not like myself. I didn't like how I looked. And that was just something that I had been born with, that I hated about myself. Yes, it was hard to hear people call me bulldog, and it was hard to hear people tell me I was ugly, and it was hard to be questioned what's wrong with my face. But if it didn't already bother me, those things wouldn't have either. So it really just was something that I needed to experience so that I could go through that transformation. Because I went through 8.5-hour surgery at 16, and I had to have blood put back into me, and some of which wasn't even mine, you know? But it was exactly what had to happen, and that's how I see a lot of that. It's my mission, my life, my purpose, my path, regardless of how society or culture sees me. Because culture could have said that's not our way. And I would have had to suffer my life looking the way I did, hating myself. But in today's society, it's okay to be able to go and make yourself feel better in a way where I wouldn't have, you know? The addiction, that's the second part of the question, right? So the second question was, okay, so, right. So the question is mental health and addiction a priority issue amongst First Nation communities? Is that? Okay, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I can only speak from my own experience. You know, my mental health and addiction, it was, and I say this very, very, very lightly. This doesn't apply to all people, you know. It's what I had to do to get me through, so I was still here. It helped me disconnect from those emotional triggers and those feelings of hatred, self-hatred, and it disconnected me from moments of abuse, and it disconnected me from being present when I was hurting. It helped me not feel. And in order to be able to still be here, I had to not feel certain things in my life. Now, having cleared myself of the addiction, I do feel that it is now a time in my life when I can return to those moments of hardships and reconnect with those pains in a way where I can transmute that pain into my power. I empower my life through my experience. I had I had struggles. I raised 3 kids on my own, and I went through abusive relationships. I quite literally was hurting myself more than they were hurting me, but it was the way that was keeping me I can't finish that. I'm still here. And that doesn't apply to everybody. But I do know that at the time of going through what I was going through, it did help me disconnect and not feel anything. And with other First Nation communities having such a priority on this issue, the only real people that can help these, or those that are going through these mental health and addictions, are those that are going through mental health and addictions. We are our own healers. Only I knew what I needed so that I didn't have to use anymore. And I needed to do that with truth. And that was one of the first things that I did, was I came clean. I told my kids and I told my parents that I was using so that nobody else could use that against me. And then I took that dive. And there are supports out there. So anybody that's struggling with mental health and addictions, it is necessary to find somebody that at least you feel a connection to. Because all it takes is one person to just listen. Nobody needs to fix you. It's just you have a purpose for what you're going through, and something in that is going to be able to empower yourself to do more for others. So, yeah, thank you. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Any other questions? No?
Thank you once again, Jamie Montour. That was really, really wonderful. Thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you for watching at home.